I've been making videos and doing a lot of comments about our political false dichotomy, and I'm completely amazed at how many intelligent people fall for it. People who make all of these wonderful intellectual videos that are just falling for the same trap we've had in our political system for decades. Now it's Don Exodus doing it, and for some reason he just doesn't want to turn the same critical eye towards Obama as he does towards McCain. Take a look at this example.
The first example regarding fear, it's no doubt whatsoever that people will give up any civil liberties or common sense or judgment if you simply scare the crap out of them.
Well, what he's missing here is Obama does this too. Yeah, Obama's just clever enough to be more subtle about it, but he uses fear all the time. For example, if you read Obama's webpage on Social Security, he says phrases like, "Too many companies have dumped their pension obligations, leaving workers out in the cold." And he also talks about skyrocketing healthcare, energy, and housing costs, and too many seniors do not have the resources to live comfortably. But the truth is, the 65 and older demographic is the wealthiest demographic in America. They're actually the wealthiest segment by age of our entire population. They just have the biggest lobby. So this idea of poor and starving seniors, it's just preying on fear. And that's exactly what McCain does. Obama does it too, he's just more subtle about it.
The other thing that McCain does is instead of talking about the issues, he resorts to labels and relies on the fact that if you repeat something over and over and over again, it gets solidified in people's heads, regardless of if it's true or not.
Oh, you mean like repeatedly saying you're for change when there's nothing in your record to back it up? I mean, come on, when has Obama's voting record shown him to be anything than just another status quo, business as usual, tax, borrow, and spend politician? Just like McCain, just like Bush, just like Clinton's, both Clintons actually.
Just like Bush the first, just like Reagan, just like Carter, and so on, and so on, and so on.
All the way back to probably Grover Cleveland, or at least Warren Harding. You know, Obama has no logical basis whatsoever for this claim of being for change.
The irony is that the ones crying socialism are the ones who would be helped by Obama's policies. That, and I would love to see the attack ads run against Jesus if he were to run in 2008. You know, caring for the sick, caring for the poor. Yeah, I don't think that he would fare too well.
Maybe they actually do realize that these same policies, which are socialist, by the way, they're actually, read the Communist Manifesto, that's what it's all about. These are exactly what's holding down the poor. Before Johnson's Great Society, the poor usually didn't stay poor for too long. They'd stay poor for, a few years, and then they'd work hard and they'd get better and they'd be able to improve things. And yes, there were exceptions. There were many exceptions, particularly the way blacks were held down by segregation and by racist policies, most of which has been done away with by now, so that's not a problem anymore, at least not as significant a problem as it was then. But since the Great Society, the poor as a whole have stayed poor longer, and being poor has actually now been a legacy that you can pass on to your kids, whereas before, someone being poor didn't necessarily mean that the next generation would be poor. In fact, they usually weren't. They were usually better off. And that's not the case anymore. And it's exactly because of these policies. And for just one example, if you look at the minimum wage, and I showed this in another video, along with economic theory, there are numerous studies showing that minimum wage is actually a terrible policy for the poor. They say, you need the living wage, and because people think that minimum wage means that everybody's going to be paid $6 an hour or whatever it is. But in reality, what it says is that if you can't demand at least $6 an hour from where you work, from the kind of job you do, from the kind of worker you are, from the amount of value you can bring to an employer, then you are legally prohibited from having a job. That's what the minimum wage means. But again, if we look at Barack Obama's page, what does he say? He says, Obama and Biden will also increase the minimum wage and index it to inflation to ensure it rises every year. So he's going beyond this. He's going to make the problem worse. If you study economics, you know that wages are stickier than prices, and what that means is that wages lag behind what prices are doing. So if inflation causes prices to rise, it's going to be a little while before the wages catch up with that, at which point the prices have risen further if you're in an inflationary economy like ours. If you can't increase your skill set or your work history or whatever fast enough to keep up with the inflation rate, then you should be legally prohibited from having a job. That's Obama's policy. All this indexing will just cause even more jobs held by the poor, and especially by minorities, to be lost. But in all of this, all of Obama's issues and positions, is there even one word about fixing our monetary policy in order to get rid of inflation? No, not one word.
Perhaps the most egregious appeal to Basel-level thinking can be seen with the "If you don't vote for me, you're not a real American" by Sarah Palin.
Well, how is that any different from "If you don't vote for me, you hate the poor"? I mean, I know Obama's too subtle to come right out and say it, but that's the clear implication of what he is saying, and that's the clear implication of your video.
Every election is just about a giant douche versus a turd sandwich, in the sense if you never vote for somebody, you vote against somebody and pick the lesser of two evils. And I really used to think that about Barack Obama until some things recently kind of changed my mind. First is this brilliant speech based on the separation of church and state.
Oh, so now you're basing things on speeches. Well, why don't you base things on what politicians do rather than what they say? Politicians will tell you anything to get elected. One of our Senate candidates, Kay Hagan, she cozied up to the Secular Coalition of America and got support of the Godless Americans PAC. And then just this past week, when her opponent, Elizabeth Dole, the incumbent senator, started challenging her on it and railed on it, she just hung all of the secularists and all of the atheists and all of the rationalists, hung us all out to dry, just completely abandoned us just to go along with what she thought would get her elected. So she's doing whatever she can to get elected, and so is Obama. It's just that's what they all do. If they think that you're someone who can help them get elected, then they're all for you. If you're not, then they just toss you in the gutter.
Second, I saw him taking on the propaganda that is Fox News, and I thought that was pretty good to go too, because it's finally somebody's demanding accountability.
Finally? What do you mean finally? Finally? Obama's just riding the coattails of libertarians who have been doing this at least since the year 2000. When you look at someone doing something and assume that they're the first, assume that there's the leader, that's when you have to consider whether you're just buying into a cult of personality.
One thing that does bother me about Barack Obama, however, is the whole Reverend Right thing. I'm not going to lie, that actually does bother me. But when you take a look at John McCain's pastor, who said that Hurricane Katrina was God's punishment for gays, or take a look at Sarah Palin's pastor, who brags about hunting witches and basically removing a young woman from a village because the car crashes around there were blamed on her witchcraft, it kind of gets evened out there.
And why haven't you said anything about Bob Barr's pastor? Do you know anything about Bob Barr's pastor? Do you even know who he is? I don't. I'm just presuming that he even has one. He probably does. I'm sure he has a pastor. But the point here is the false dichotomy. The only choices we really have are the ones the establishment tells us we can have, and everything else is a wasted vote. But the only way to waste your vote is to fall for this. Because if you keep going with what they say, you will never, ever, ever get what you want.
And I guess in closing, if you're still deciding to vote for John McCain, I have to ask, have you learned absolutely nothing in the past 8 years? Since 2001, John McCain has voted with George Bush 90+% of the time. And in 2008, most recently, he's voted with him 100% of the time.
Why didn't you put up a graph showing how often Obama votes with Bush? Yet with the exception of 1 or 2 bills, he's voted along with everything Bush wanted to continue to fund and expand the war. He just voted right along with him. Obama claims to be for civil liberties, yet he voted for the national ID card. He voted for the wireless wiretapping. Obama claims to want tax cuts for the poor, and see my previous video about tax cuts to know what they're worth. They're not. It's just accounting mumbo-jumbo. But he doesn't propose doing anything about the inflation tax, which is the most regressive tax there is. It hurts the poor more than anything else. When has anything Obama has done in the Senate matched what he says he will do in the White House? When has he been anything other than a politician who's just willing to go along with the rest of them? I mean, he makes a good talk, and he's very subtle about doing all these other things, but when it comes right down to it, when you logically examine it, he's just another status quo politician. If he hasn't done this in the Senate, what reason do we have for believing he'll change all of a sudden when he's elected president? Stop falling for the false dichotomy. Either find a presidential candidate you can truly believe in and vote for him, or don't vote at all. Whatever you do, don't ever give your vote to a politician like Obama or McCain, who's just going to do more of what's caused all our problems to begin with. Don't vote for them because it only encourages them.